What's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything right here on Sifted Games at sifted.net. I'm Shane Satterfield. I've been covering video games now for about 30 years professionally. Not a lot of people can say that, and I am here to answer your questions, but not just about video games. As the show's title implies, you can ask me about anything. And I've been around the block, and I can provide commentary on just about anything. This show happens because a bunch of our patrons at patreon.com/sifted are pledging at $7 or more per month at that Ask Shane Anything tier. Your outpouring of support makes me love doing this show even more than I already do. And believe me, this is one of my highlights of the week, getting to answer your questions. If you like this show, consider heading to our Patreon and helping us out if you can. We'd really appreciate it. Let's get on with another round of great questions. All right, first up this week comes Derek D111. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? Game Pass is an unsustainable model that's been damaging the industry for a decade. Okay, so this question is kind of a follow-on of what I talked about in last week's edition of Ask Shane Anything. I'm not going to go into the whole Xbox layoffs, game cancellations again. I talked about it at length in last week's Ask Shane Anything. We just talked about it for a really long time in the latest Game Face, so I don't want to go back over that stuff again, but I will answer your question because I don't think we actually answered that on Game Face. So this quote that he's asking me to either agree or disagree with is coming from one of the co-founders of Arcane. He basically came out and said that Game Pass is a terrible idea, and that it's killing the industry, and it's Microsoft's problem, and blah, blah, blah. So, look, I hate to fall back on some of the stuff I said last week, but one important thing when you're looking at anything is looking at the information that you have. If you don't have information, making decisions on anything is probably foolhardy. So trying to find data on Game Pass is really hard because Microsoft hides it. And to me, that is also information. The fact that Microsoft hides the totals for Game Pass, that's important information. Because let's be honest, if Game Pass subscriptions were setting the world on fire, they would be putting out a press release about it every month. What it really feels like, and based upon the anecdotal data that I've been told by people in the know and people behind the scenes at Xbox, they basically rushed out to 30 million subscribers, and it has been a struggle ever since to add new subscribers, and the huge cash outlay that they outlaid for the acquisition of Activision Blizzard, which was like $69 billion, that hasn't really bumped up anything. If you spend $69 billion for a very specific reason, which in this case is to boost the subscribership of Game Pass, and that investment has done basically nothing, I mean, it hasn't sped up the adoption of Game Pass really at all. And I have to admit, I mean, I'm sure Microsoft is like, what the heck is going on? I'm like, what the heck is going on? Like, I can't believe that more people aren't subscribing to Game Pass. I can't. It is the best deal going in gaming. It's such a great deal that Derek D111 is asking me this question based upon something the founder of Arcane said. He said that it's killing the industry. The Game Pass is killing the industry. He also went on to say that it cheapens the value of games. I've seen a lot of people compare Game Pass to Steam sales. The big ones, like the Steam Summer Sale, or those like once or twice a year big deals that they do on Steam. They say that cheapens the value of games because during that week you can go and buy a lot of games for like $5, $6, $10 or whatever. That's what they say about Game Pass, is that it cheapens the value of the art that the developers are producing, because suddenly people are like, well, if I can pay $20 a month and I can play this new Indiana Jones game and I can play the new Doom game and I can play all these awesome games that are coming out day and date on that service, are they really worth $70 or $80? They're certainly not worth that value to the person subscribing to Game Pass who's getting all those games for $20 a month. So I can understand where the perception might be that games maybe aren't worth what they're asking for if Microsoft can afford to just charge $20 a month to get access to pretty much all the games. Maybe they're not worth all that much. The average consumer does not look at games that closely. We do, because we love them, and it's our favorite entertainment medium, it's our favorite hobby. We look at things that way. The average consumer that buys 2 or 3 games per year, they do not. They don't dive in enough, they don't care enough. So if they're smart enough and they're in tune enough, they have someone good in their life who tells them to subscribe to Game Pass, and they go there, they're not going to look at it like, well, now I'm never buying a game at full price again. Like if there's somebody who owns an Xbox and a PlayStation 5, I really don't think that they're going to say, well, I'm not buying the new Naughty Dog game now because I can play these other games on Game Pass. I just don't see that happening. So back to your question, the root of your question, do I agree or disagree with Game Pass being unsustainable and that it's been damaging the industry for a decade? I think giving people access to the very best video games is going to make them want to play more great video games. So I think it actually helps the industry more than it hurts the industry. Now, is it sustainable? This goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. Without the data, it's just impossible to know. They bury the Game Pass data so deep, and now Matt mentioned this on Game Face, there's rumors flying around that Microsoft actually isn't taking into account the money that it invests in game development as part of whether Game Pass is breaking even or not. That's just a rumor. Nobody knows if that's true or not. But the bottom line is we do not have any real data other than that I think Microsoft actually shared at one point 30 million. But that's when the numbers were climbing. Now that they have kind of plateaued, we don't get that data anymore. So I think it's probably pretty accurate that it's sitting somewhere between 35 and 40 million subscribers at this point. Is it sustainable? It's sustainable because it's Microsoft. If it were, even Nintendo could probably handle the loss. If there are losses, even Nintendo could probably handle the losses of a Game Pass because it has so much cash that you can't even fathom it. PlayStation, on the other hand, I do not think that it would survive working with the Game Pass model. Sony, you got to remember, even though PlayStation does at this point make up the bulk of profits at Sony Computer Entertainment or Sony period, they still do other things. They have just dozens and dozens of other products that Sony sells. And that stuff hasn't really picked up the slack over the last decade or so when PlayStation has had the few downturns that it's had. Sony really relies on PlayStation to float the boat, is what I'm getting at. And it doesn't have a lot of resources to backfill if PlayStation ends up taking a nosedive. So I don't think PlayStation could do it. I do think Nintendo could do it. And maybe Nintendo's the one that should be doing it with its awesome first-party catalog. But Microsoft, with its endless pit of money, it can really just keep throwing money in the hole, and it'll be a rounding error in their financials. So, first of all, don't feel bad for Microsoft. If it wants to keep shoveling money into a hole so you get to play these awesome games for $20 a month, just let it happen. All right, next up, we have a question from Commander Fett. Hey Shane, why do you think that Nintendo never seems to have layoffs or issues keeping studios releasing quality games? Do you think it will start having these issues now that it's making 4K games? Is it something that you think it won't be able to maintain, or is this mostly an issue with how different management styles work? Well, Commander Fett, the reason Nintendo is able to produce quality games at a steady clip, and we're talking like 1 or 2 per month. I know the launch of Switch 2, it's been a little anemic with software. I think probably late next year, Nintendo will get back into its cadence of 1 or 2 big games per month, every frickin' month. And the reason that this has happened, and I've mentioned this before on Ask Shane Anything, is because Nintendo already had all these development studios that was working for it. But it was splitting up those development studios between its handheld and its console. So 3DS and Wii U, 3DS and the Wii, you can keep going back, GBA and GameCube. They always had these 2 platforms that were completely different. And in the past, those handhelds were generally like 2D handhelds. Maybe they had some 3D games here and there, but for the most part, they were 2D. And then Nintendo had its consoles where it was making 3D games. And those were very different skill sets. Well, with the Switch 1, Nintendo was like, let's just unify all our development teams. They're all working on the same platform now. And they're all mostly working on 3D games now. And I'm sure there was some growing pains internally for Nintendo, getting some of those studios that mostly made 2D games for a really long time up to speed on making 3D games. But it did it pretty quickly. And what was the result? What you're talking about. We get awesome games pretty much every month. So that's what did it. There's nothing else behind it. Now, to your question about 4K development. So you're right in saying that this is something that Nintendo hasn't really done all that much. But developing games in 4K, and I talked about this in a few episodes ago. Someone was asking me, is it easier to make cartoony games? And I said, yeah, in a lot of ways it is. So it's a little easier for Nintendo to make 4K games because their games aren't realistic. And so people don't like have a frame of reference like, that doesn't look right, that human face doesn't look right, versus like, it's a Goomba. Nobody knows what a Goomba is supposed to really look like anyway. Nintendo can change its design and people are like, okay, that's what a Goomba looks like now. You can't do that with human beings. So Nintendo, I don't think, will have as tough a transition into 4K as maybe other developers did. I think the tougher part for Nintendo is figuring out the logistics of it, meaning now that you have 4K textures in your games, you need a lot more space for your games. Where we were getting like Zelda games that were gigantic, but they were only 8 or 10 gigabytes, that's not going to happen anymore with 4K textures. I still don't think they're going to bloat up to like 100 gigs like a lot of PS5 and Xbox Series games, but I do think you'll start seeing Nintendo's games get around 20, 25 gigs, things like that. And I think that's Nintendo's problem. The fact that it's decided to go with cartridges, and that's why we're getting these game key cards now, which are basically just blank pieces of plastic that have a code like in them. They don't actually have the game on them to save money, because cartridges that are 100 gigs are way too much. It was not feasible. So to me, that is Nintendo's biggest hurdle, moving to 4K, is managing the data and the size of games. I don't really think it's game development. Now, if Nintendo suddenly decided, like, hey, you know, we want to start making games that look a little bit more realistic, then it might run into a place where it's like, dang, we really took this for granted. All the work that all these other studios have been doing all these years, it takes a lot of skill that we really don't have, but I just don't see that happening. Nintendo will rely on third parties to do that. Now, from their perspective, if they're trying to make an exclusive game for Switch 2 or whatever, and Nintendo's commissioned a third party to do that, they're the ones who are going to have to deal with making sure that their textures aren't too big and they can fit on the cartridges. Again, I think that's the biggest issue, not the actual artistic and production angle of working with 4K assets, particularly because Nintendo's games don't really use an art style that could expose a lack of skill in that area. Question number 3 comes from OJD. What are your thoughts on both EA and 2K teasing a return to college basketball? Seems like the success of College Football 25 has gotten both studios in a frenzy to jump into this void. Well, as a sports gamer, and I would say I was way more of a sports gamer in my early years. I'll just be honest. As I've gotten older, I don't play sports games anywhere near as much as I used to. Like, I get Madden now and I play it for like a day, and I check out the new stuff, which isn't usually new stuff. I play a few games online. I go through like a season of the franchise mode, and that's pretty much it. Used to be I get a new Madden and I'd play it all year long and play online head-to-head like every night, a game or two. I've just kind of fallen off. I feel like the sports games have become overly complicated and not necessarily more fun. So I still kind of gravitate to the more arcade-style sports games. Those are more like the games that I would actually play consistently, like night after night, versus the sports simulation. So anyway, back to your question. You're right. College Football 25 last year, it came back for the first time in 11 years, and it sold like gangbusters. It's like the best-selling sports game ever, or something like that. It's close to like the best-selling ever. So you're right. I think a lot of publishers looked at that and were like, wow. But here's the thing. People were thirsty for a college football game for a really long time. I mean, honestly, I think, and I probably should have looked this up before I answered this, but I think that there are more college football fans in America than there are NFL fans. I really believe that, because college is much more regional. There's hundreds and hundreds of colleges. There's only 32 NFL teams. So I think there are more college football fans than NFL fans, and I think that was proven with the sales of last year's College Football 25, which also, by the way, was a pretty darn good game. But here's the thing. The next one's coming out here in like 2 weeks. It's only been 11 months since the last one. No one's thirsty anymore. I predict College Football 26 is going to struggle to get to around 2/3 of the sales of last year's game. I think it's still going to sell really well, but I think sales are going to be significantly smaller. Now, I think these publishers are foolish to think that because college football was huge, that college basketball will be huge. And here's the other thing that's kind of happening here is there's NIL money, which means for decades, forever, college athletes could not accept money. They had to play for free, and what they got in exchange was a free scholarship to get a degree or whatever. Well, now there's this thing called NIL money, where literally like the local car dealership can just give the quarterback of Alabama $1 million a year, and then he does the corny commercials for the dealership on TV or whatever. College athletes can make money now, is what I'm getting at. And so for a long time, college basketball didn't make as much sense because college basketball players were playing like a season or two and then leaving for the NBA. Now that there's NIL money, there is a possibility that college players will stick around a little bit longer before turning pro because they're making money in college. Imagine making if you went to college. Imagine making like $2 million a year while you're attending college. Talk about being the big man on campus. I can't even imagine the life that you would have. So I do think that the NIL stuff will keep people in college sports longer, but it's still not like it used to be, where they stayed all 4 years. And that's when these games really thrive, because you could actually attach to players that you liked and follow them through their college career. Now their college career is like they play one place for a year, then they enter the transfer portal, then they play somewhere else for a year, and then they go to the NBA. And that's not just college basketball, that's college football too. So the real sport is changing. The real sports are changing, and how they're handling paying athletes, and now the athletes maybe will stick around a little bit longer, but still, it's like, how many college basketball players can you name? Even if you watched March Madness a few months ago, I bet most people can maybe name 5. I can maybe name 3. So there's not that attachment to the players as there is in pro sports, but as I said, there's an attachment to the teams, because it's this very regional thing in America where you may not have an NFL team within 500 miles of you, but there's probably 3 college football teams within 100 miles of you. So I do think there's built-in interest, but the problem is, even back in the day, decades ago, when there were these college basketball games, no one really bought them. And again, I think a big part of it is just releasing them every year. You can't release a niche sports game every year. So here's what I'm going to say. They need to make sure that the first game's really good. Like, they need to really spend their time. And it looks like EA's game isn't coming out for a couple years still. So it looks like they're doing it the right way. They're going to make sure these new games are really good. That's one thing that they absolutely need to do. They need to make sure that the first entry really knocks people's socks off. And then they do not have to release it every year. How about every 4 years? As if you were just like a college athlete. Something like that. Then you get meaningful upgrades every time a new one comes out. You just update the rosters for 3 years, add tweaks here and there, some DLC to keep money coming in while you're working on the other one. Annual college basketball games are never going to work. Okay, our last question for this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything comes from Liberal Hack. On GameFace, AI often gets compared to the grift that is NFTs and crypto. But AI has actual real-world productive capabilities that a lot of people think are going to result in seismic shifts as AI displaces jobs in many industries. There seems to be a tension between these two positions, that it's a scam, it doesn't work, etc., but also that it poses a real threat to employment. What prediction do you have for the state of AI, gaming or otherwise, in 2, 5, and 10 years from now? Okay, Liberal Hack, I'm not gonna, if I answer 2, 5, and 10, this answer will be an hour long. So I'm just gonna give you my overall impressions about AI. One thing I will say on GameFace is that usually I don't get a chance to say a lot about it. Once we start talking about it, Matt just kind of takes over the conversation, and by the time he's done talking about it, I'm like, we gotta move on. I don't usually get a lot of time to say what I think about AI on GameFace. So I'm gonna say it here. The first thing I'm going to say is you're right. It's not worthless. It's not worthless. It is going to take a lot of jobs, all the jobs, a lot of high-paying jobs. I think one thing that intrinsically I dislike about AI is that it levels the intelligence playing field in some ways. People who can't write now all of a sudden can write like somebody who's been writing, went to college for it, and wrote for 20 years learning how to do it on their own. Can I outright AI? I think I can, but it's not by a mile. And a lot of people who were horrible writers, and in a lot of cases their lack of education or lack of intelligence came through in their writing, they can now hide that stuff. So it's going to help those who are less fortunate in the intelligence department to level the playing field with people who are intelligent. And I think it's going to become very difficult to hire good people. Because don't forget, those people are also using AI to write their cover letter and to dust up their resume, or even write their resume. So, look, if you're not very smart, you got to be really happy about AI, because it literally makes you look a whole lot smarter than you really are. And so I think there's going to be an issue with brain drain, because it's going to be difficult to figure out who the smart people are to hire. Even with this current environment where if you apply for a job, you end up going literally through like 6 interviews before you get the job. Sometimes you go through 6 interviews before they even call you in for a face-to-face interview. Even with all that, people are going to be able to put it on and get through those screening processes, and you're going to have idiots taking jobs that they probably shouldn't have. So that's one problem I have with AI. But to your point, there's no denying it's going to take jobs. It already is taking jobs. It's funny how for the last 10 years, if somebody was struggling to get employment, the Boilerplate response to that person was learn to code. Stop whining and learn to code. Because if you learn to code, you'll have a job for the rest of your life. Not so fast, buddy. Not so fast. You can use ChatGPT and other AI programs to program just about anything you want now. And it's still not perfect. It still makes mistakes, but it gets better every single day. And so even jobs that 5 years ago people thought were safe into perpetuity are not. So yes, AI is going to take over jobs where it's just, I wouldn't even say it's a menial task. I would say it's going to take over jobs where the position is a repetitive thing that you do over and over that doesn't require any real reason or thinking. And that is the difference with AI. It cannot reason. It cannot think. It isn't even smart enough to double check its work. Like it will give you an answer, but you can easily Google that answer and see it's fake. It won't even do that. So here's the thing. Right now with AI, you can't trust it. You need to watch it and check everything it does to make sure it does it right. Will that continue to be the case? I think it probably will. Because again, it's not a human being. It doesn't take all its experiences, all the things that it's absorbed, and then think about it in a rational way and apply it to real world situation. It can't do that. That's something only a human can do. So to me, eventually, the only jobs that are going to be left with this round of AI are jobs where humans have to reason or there's creativity involved, where you're creating something from scratch. Go to ChatGPT and say, give me an idea for a video game. Or better yet, say, give me an innovative idea for a video game and see what you get. They're just going to get a bunch of gobbledygook about games that have already been released. So anything creative, anything that requires reasoning and human thinking, those jobs are going to be safe, but there just aren't that many jobs like that anymore. So where are we headed in 10 years? 10 years, we'll probably get through Gen AI and people will realize, okay, this is all it can do. It can replace menial jobs where you do repetitive things over and over and over again. It can't replace creatives. It can't replace people who are doing things from scratch, coming up with a new idea for a company. Go ask AI for $1 million idea for a company and see what it tells you. It's probably not going to give you a good result. So that kind of stuff I think is safe, but there just aren't that many jobs. So 10 years, we're going to lose a lot of labor force already at that point. But I'm thinking like, what's after Gen AI? Once they realize that Gen AI isn't sentient and it can't reason, then what do they come up with? And what they then come up with then, that's what scares me. When they do figure out how to have a computer take in a bunch of information and then reason with it, that's when I think things get scary. And at that point, everything is automated. It's so funny how people are like, let's bring manufacturing back to America. There is no manufacturing. It doesn't exist anymore. It's robots. Robots do everything now. If anything, the best job you can get is repairing robots. Learn how to repair the robots, but then there aren't going to be many of those jobs. At each plant, you're probably going to have 10 or 15 people who are there to fix the robots. We're headed to disaster is what I'm getting at. We will get to a place eventually where nobody has jobs. Everyone's working at a convenience store for minimum wage or whatever, and our society collapses. That's when it gets nasty. Eventually, we're going to get to a place where AI and robots have all the jobs. And what are we going to do? How do you survive? How do you eat? Is the government just going to send us a check so we can just survive every month? What else do you do when half of your society doesn't have any money to eat? So I think we're headed towards big time crossroads in the not too distant future. I do think within 20 years, we're going to start dealing with this stuff. It's scary. There's no doubt about it. And if like my niece and nephew came to me and said, Shane, what should I do for like a job? What should I major in college? I would say creative stuff. Start your own business. All right, that's it for this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything right here on Sifted Games at sifted.net. A big thanks, as always, to all our patrons, no matter how much you're pledging. I love y'all so much, and I appreciate you guys so much, and girls. If you like this show, maybe head on over there to patreon.com/sifted and give us a pledge. For $5 a month, you get all our content early. If you really like this show and you want to see it keep going, maybe consider pledging at $7 or more per month at that Ask Shane tier. That would be sweet. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We'll be back next week. Have yourselves an awesome week filled with awesome video games.